XI. The Connection Restriction Acte, Final Interquel to His Kiss. The Guillotine, Part 1. The statute the bill passed in winter, the way most cruelty does quietly, in a session nobody watched, buried under language about public neurological safety and cascade liability. The Connection Restriction Act made unauthorized deep attachment a Class B offense. Not a crime of action, a crime of state. You didn't have to hurt anyone. You only had to be found. By the diagnostic standards MES had spent 30 years refining. To be bonded, cascade positive, the old researchers would have called it. Two nervous systems too entangled to pass inspection. The penalty was dissociation therapy. Mandatory, court-ordered. A return, dressed in clinical language, to everything the ministry had once forced through compliance chips. Except now it came with a consent form nobody was permitted to refuse. Elena Vasquez was 61 when they arrested her granddaughter. Part 2. Myra and Theo Mira was 19. Theo was 20. They'd met in the Underground's last working chapter, in a condemned theater 3 subway stops from the address MES had on file for known sentiment activity. They hadn't meant to fall in love loudly. They'd meant to be careful, the way Alina had taught every generation since hers to be careful. They weren't careful enough. Or maybe they simply stopped trying to be, somewhere in the second year, when carefulness started to feel like its own kind of dying. The arrest came on a Tuesday. A diagnostic scan at a routine health screening flagged synchronized neural patterns consistent with unauthorized bonding. Myra was hauled in first. Theo turned himself in 4 hours later, not because he had to, but because he refused to let her face the tribunal, as if she'd done something alone that they had done, completely together. Didn't have to come, she told him in the holding room, her voice raw. I know, Theo said. That's why I came. Part 3. The tribunal, the courtroom hadn't changed in 3 decades. Same gray walls. Same careful, uncorrupted faces on the panel, magistrates raised entirely under MES, who had never once, by design, felt what they were here to judge. You are charged, the lead magistrate said, with unauthorized deep attachment in violation of the Connection Restriction Act. How do you plead? Guilty, Theo said, before his counsel could stop him. A murmur went through the room. Myra's lawyer, a court-appointed underground sympathizer named Dax, who'd spent 20 years losing exactly this kind of case, closed his eyes briefly. The particular grief of watching a client refuse the only defense available to them. Guilty, Myra echoed. You understand, the magistrate said, not unkindly, in the flat way of someone reading from policy rather than feeling it, that a guilty plea waives your right to contest the diagnostic findings. The court can proceed directly to sentencing. We understand, Theo said. We're not contesting that we love each other. We're only here to put it on the record. Part 4. The record. This was the only weapon the underground had ever really had, not weapons at all, but witness. The trial, broadcast as all CRA cases were for public neurological education, became the platform Alina's generation had spent 30 years waiting for. Before sentencing, Dax said, my clients have prepared statements. The court is required to hear them. The magistrate's mouth tightened, But the law was the law, even the law built to crush people like Myra and Theo. Myra stood first. She didn't read from notes. My grandmother told me about a girl named Sophia who died because she was taught that feeling was necessary, and then told her feeling didn't count. I am not going to apologize for loving someone in a theater nobody was supposed to find. You can call what's between us a diagnostic finding. You can write it into a file as synchronized neural patterns. That doesn't change what it actually is, which is the only thing I have ever done in 19 years that felt like mine. Theo stood next. There were people before us who tried to swim and drowned. There were people who learned to float because swimming wasn't built for them. There were people who asked for mercy because the water never stopped being too deep. I used to think the bravest thing was surviving. I don't think that anymore. The bravest thing is this, standing here, saying it out loud on the record, knowing what it costs. He turned to Myra. I love you. That's the whole crime. I'd commit it again. Part 5. The sentence, the court, the magistrate said, and for the first time her voice was not entirely flat, finds the defendants guilty as charged. Sentencing. Immediate referral to dissociation therapy to be administered within 72 hours. No one in the gallery moved. Alina, in the third row, gripped the bench in front of her hard enough to whiten her knuckles, fighting the old, useless instinct to stand up and offer herself instead. The way she'd offered herself to 100 frightened students who'd come through her network over 30 years and never once been able to offer them enough. Before we're taken, Myra said, we'd like to read some names into the record, if the court will allow it. The magistrate hesitated. It wasn't procedure. It also wasn't strictly forbidden. Briefly, she said, Theo read first. Sophia Reeves, River Jordan Reeves, Cale Severance, who carried 14 stones. Myra continued. Amara Patel, Marcus Okonkwo, Chen Okafor, who asked at the end what it was all for. We don't know what it was for, Myra said, looking at the magistrate now, not performing anymore, just talking, the way you'd talk to someone you'd given up trying to convince. Maybe nothing. Maybe it was for this, for the fact that you can pass a law against a feeling, and the feeling doesn't go anywhere. It just goes underground. It waits. It comes back wearing different names. Part 6. After they were let out separately, as the law required proximity itself being treated as a relapse risk. Myra didn't fight it. Neither did Theo. There was nothing left to fight that fighting would have changed. The broadcast cut to static before the procedure room. MES didn't air that part. It never had. What MES couldn't control was what happened in the 6 hours between the verdict and the transport. When the broadcast had already gone out to every screen in the network, and somewhere in a city, the sensors hadn't fully mapped yet. A 17-year-old who'd never met Myra or Theo or Alina watched 2 strangers choose honesty over self-preservation live on a tribunal feed meant to teach her that connection was dangerous. She did not learn that lesson. She found the underground's old contact protocols in an archive nobody had bothered to wipe, because nobody who built the Connection Restriction Act had ever believed love needed instructions to spread. Epilogue. What the law cannot hold Alina was buried, eventually, near Chen's scattered ashes, near Kale's stones, in a garden that had outlived 4 governments, and at least 3 names for the same impulse to make feeling smaller than it was. Nobody knows, in the official record, what became of Myra and Theo after the therapy. The files are sealed. MES does not publish outcomes. Outcomes might suggest the procedure has them. But the underground tells a different story, the kind that isn't verified and doesn't need to be. That somewhere, years later, 2 people who were strangers to the law, but not to each other, found their way back to the same condemned theater, sat in the same broken seats, and did not feel like strangers at all. It might not be true. It might be exactly the kind of myth a movement tells itself to keep walking. It is, either way, the only ending that ever made the law look smaller than the thing it was trying to kill. You can criminalize a feeling. You cannot, in the end,